20 grams of Mimosa hostilis bark was grounded with a good knife. Then I boiled up a large amount of water, added some freshly squeezed lemon juice, and made sure the pH was between 4 and 5. The plant material was put in a smaller pan and pH-adjusted water was added. I let this boil for an hour or so, and more water was added whenever necessary. Then the liquid was strained and the plant material was boiled in water a second time, also for an hour or so. At this time, the water did not change color as much as the first time. The liquid was strained and mixed with the rest of the liquid. This was boiled for a while till all I had left was a small amount of very concentrated red liquid. This was put in a small cup and left to cool down for a few hours. I had been on the irreversible MAO inhibitor Phenelzine, Nardial, for almost 7 weeks. Due to this fact, I was not sure if the DMT would have any effect at all, and if so, at least weaker effects than usually. Reference 1. At 23:20, the liquid was ingested. About 20 to 30 minutes later, the effects kicked in. I lied down in my bed. I quickly got quite intense open-eye visuals, but not any closed-eye visuals. And note that there was no vomiting whatsoever. My heart started beating very quickly, at least that was what it felt like, and breathing got uncomfortable. Suddenly my jaws started clenching and I worried about having somehow induced a serotonin syndrome, very dangerous, potentially fatal. I just tried to relax and concentrate on my breathing. I felt a floating sensation and I felt like melting. That is all I remember. About 4 to 5 hours later I found myself getting back to consciousness, still lying in my bed, running with sweat. I was tripping and had quite cool hallucinations, but no closed-eye visuals. Then I saw it. The area around my bed was completely ravaged. My stereo was standing on the floor, and the table it had previously stood at had been moved and was completely empty. Both my speakers were also on the floor, one of them was even far away under my bed. Even the glass of a large picture lying under my bed was broken, and there was broken glass everywhere. A magazine had been moved and the front page had been torn. This magazine had just been used a short while ago to kill a wasp. All my new psychedelic rock CDs were scattered on the floor. A jug and a glass of water had fallen down off the table and many of my CDs and CD covers were completely wet. My expensive LED glasses for my mind machine had been broken, luckily not too severely. I also found an open box of B vitamins standing on the floor. I had probably tried to take some, contain niacin, to ease the trip. My stomach was not feeling too well, so I went to the toilet. My pupils were enormous. I had cut on my knee, bumps in the back of my head and a lot of wounds and scratches on my hands and arms, and even in my face. My jaws were hurting and I have bitten myself in the tongue. Afterwards, I drank a lot of water and ingested some B vitamins. Then I went back to bed and listened to the Grateful Dead and the Byrds for a while until I fell asleep. With very high dosage, a brief period of unconsciousness or at least the inability to subsequently remember the experience will occur. This was a very strange experience. Please be very careful if you use an irreversible MAO with DMT. Do not even attempt to use more than 10 grams of Mimosa hostilis bark. Always have a sitter or guide present. The fact that I did not vomit probably also increased the experience. Reference 1. Pharmahuasca. On phenethylamines and potentiation by Jonathan Ott. Moreover, there is experimental evidence that the pharmaceutical Maui iproniazid, Marsalid, markedly inhibits the visionary effects of DMT injected intramuscularly. In 7 subjects given intramuscular injections of DMT, 2 at 0.35 to 0.55 mg per kilogram, 5 at 0.65 to 0.83 mg per kilogram, greatly reduced psychoactivity was observed when the experiment was repeated 2 days after having received 100 mg iproniazid daily. For 4 days, the DMT psychosis was less pronounced. There were illusions and hallucinations, but without colors, or only with a few of them. 9. The author commented that the high 5-HT serotonin level produced by the Maui blocked the effect of DMT, thought to owe its psychoactivity to serotonin antagonism. With higher background levels of serotonin, higher doses of DMT would be required to produce equivalent effects absent Maui. 10. That is, it was serotonin antagonism which truly potentiated DMT, while the increased brain serotonin resulting from Maui pretreatment rather had the opposite effect of DMT blocker. which would explain our limited human pharmacological data showing DMT weaker orally in huascas. We thus have both experimental and anecdotal evidence that Maui, far from potentiating LSD, rather seemed to exert an effect parallel to that of DMT blocker, serving also as LSD blockers. All this begs the question of the primary locus of MAO inhibition in the ayahuasca effect. The limited data suggest a neurochemical effect of MAO inhibition as DMT and LSD blocker. When MAOI are taken chronically, as used medicinally, so that therapeutic, high serotonin levels are achieved in the brain, both the effects of intramuscularly injected DMT and oral LSD are inhibited. 9, 12, 9. Hausch, A., 1963. The effect of MAO inhibition on the experimental psychosis induced by dimethyltryptamine. Psychopharmacologia. 4, 6, 385–388. 10. Hausch, A., 1962. The effect of antiserotonin on the experimental psychosis induced by dimethyltryptamine. Experientia. 18, 3, 137–138. 12. Resnick, O. et al. 1964. LSD 25 action in normal subjects treated with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Life Sciences. 3, 11, 1207–1214. Other information. Programmed communication during experiences with DMT. Psychedelic Review No. 8, 1966 by Timothy Leary, Ph.D. The transcendence of ego spacetime was most often noticed. Subjects frequently complained that they became so lost in the lovely flow of timeless existences that the experience ended too soon and was so smooth that landmarks were lacking to make memory very detailed. The usual milestones for perception and memory were lacking. There could be no memory of the sequence of visions because there was no time, and no memory of structure because space was converted into flowing process. Apparent communication with discarnate entities induced by DMT. Subject M. E. On the sixth occasion I took 2 inhalations of about 35 milliseconds of pure DMT in a glass pipe. Immediately upon closing my eyes I was overwhelmed by visual hallucination. This seemed to last but briefly, whereupon I passed abruptly through to another realm, losing all awareness of my body. I was as if there were alien beings there waiting for me, and I recall that they spoke to me as if they had been awaiting my arrival, but I cannot remember exactly what was said. This time, rather than, or as well as, flitting about me, the entities approached me from the front, rapidly and repeatedly, appearing to enter and pass through me. I could make no sense of what was happening. I opened my eyes and made contact with my companions, locating myself once move in the room from which had begun. Immediately I completely forgot what I had just experienced. The contents of the room appeared stable but weirdly distorted. I was able to recognize and to talk to my companions, but I felt and appeared very disoriented. The memory of this experience came back only when, that evening, I smoked the remainder of what was left in the pipe. Not enough to break through, but enough for me to remember. The Salvia Divinorum FAQ, SALVIA Trip Rating Scale Level 6, A stands for amnesic effects. At this stage either consciousness is lost, or at least one is unable to later recall what one is experiencing. The individual may fall, or remain immobile or thrash around. Somnambulistic behavior may occur. Injuries can be sustained without pain being felt. On awakening the individual will have no recollection of what she did, experienced or said in level 6. People cannot ever recall what they experience in this very deep trance state. This is not a sought-after level as later nothing can be recalled of the experience.